The night I learned that survival sometimes arrives wearing a stranger's face. The rain was falling so hard it felt like the entire city was trying to disappear. My name is Madeline Carter, and until that evening, I believed that if I kept moving, kept working, and kept pretending everything was under control, I could outrun every problem chasing me. I was wrong. Very wrong. Manhattan shimmered beneath sheets of cold rain as I hurried along the sidewalk, my coat soaked through and my thoughts racing faster than the traffic. The clock on a nearby building read 9:47 p.m. Most people were heading home. I was trying not to look over my shoulder. Fear is a strange thing. It changes the way you hear footsteps. It changes the way every passing car feels significant. It changes the way your heart reacts to shadows. For days, I had felt that fear growing. Quiet at first, then louder. Impossible to ignore. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was tired. I told myself everything would be fine if I just made it through one more day. Then came that night. A sudden sharp pain had forced me to stop several blocks earlier. The doctor would later explain that stress, exhaustion, and an untreated injury had pushed my body beyond its limits. At that moment, all I knew was that I felt weak, dizzy, unsteady. Rain blurred the lights around me. The city seemed to tilt. I reached for a nearby wall to steady myself. It did not help. My legs refused to cooperate. My vision faded around the edges. I remember hearing a car door close somewhere nearby. I remember seeing the entrance of an elegant hotel glowing beneath golden lights. I remember thinking I only needed a minute to catch my breath. Instead, my knees gave way. The world tilted forward. Then something unexpected happened. Someone caught me before I hit the ground. Strong arms, steady hands, the scent of rain and expensive cologne. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. I struggled to focus. A man's face slowly emerged through the haze. Dark coat, sharp features, eyes filled not with annoyance, but concern. Real concern. The kind that instantly feels unfamiliar when you have spent too long facing everything alone. "Stay with me," he said. His voice was calm, controlled, powerful. Around us, the rain continued falling. Hotel staff rushed toward us. People gathered near the entrance. Yet somehow his voice remained the only thing I could hear clearly. I tried to speak, tried to explain that I was fine. The words never came. His gaze moved across my face, searching for answers. Then his expression hardened slightly, as though he had noticed something nobody else had. "Who hurt you?" he demanded. The question surprised me, not because of what he asked, because of how certain he sounded, as though he already knew there was a story behind my fear, a story I had spent months hiding. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell him everything. Instead, exhaustion pulled me under. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the stranger holding me steady in the middle of the storm. And somehow, for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel alone. When I opened my eyes again, silence greeted me before reality did. For several seconds, I simply stared at an unfamiliar ceiling painted in warm shades of cream and gold. Soft morning light filtered through tall windows. Somewhere nearby, I could hear the faint sound of rain tapping against glass. My first instinct was panic. I sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it. A wave of dizziness forced me back against the pillows. "Easy." The voice came from across the room. Deep, calm, familiar. I turned my head and saw him sitting near the window. The stranger from the storm. He wore a dark sweater instead of the coat I remembered. A tablet rested in his hands, though he was no longer looking at it. He was looking at me, watching carefully, as though he had been waiting for this moment. "Where am I?" I asked. My voice sounded weaker than I wanted. "Safe." The answer arrived immediately. Not defensive, not vague. Certain. Somehow that certainty unsettled me more than anything else. I glanced around the room. Expensive furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A fireplace. Everything about the place suggested wealth and privacy. My heartbeat quickened. "Who are you?" One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Damien Rousseau. The name landed with unexpected weight. Even I knew it. Most people in Manhattan did. Successful businessman. Powerful investor. A man surrounded by rumors and influence. Seeing him in person felt different from reading headlines. More real. More intimidating. "You brought me here?" He nodded once. "A doctor examined you last night." My attention snapped back to him. "Doctor, you collapsed from exhaustion, stress, dehydration, and an untreated injury." His expression hardened slightly. Apparently, you have not been taking very good care of yourself. I looked away. Embarrassment immediately followed. The truth was difficult to argue with. Damien stood and crossed the room. He handed me a glass of water. Drink. The single word sounded less like an order and more like common sense. I accepted it reluctantly. After a few moments, silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Finally, I gathered enough courage to ask the question lingering in my mind. Why did you help me? Damien seemed genuinely surprised by that. Because you needed help. Most people would have called an ambulance and left. His gaze held mine. Steady. Unwavering. I am not most people. The answer should have sounded arrogant. Somehow it did not. Another silence followed. This one longer. Outside, rain continued falling across the city. I noticed something then. The room door was open. The curtains were open. Nothing about the space felt restrictive. If anything, it felt intentionally welcoming. As though someone wanted me to know I was free to leave whenever I wished. Damien returned to his chair by the window. He did not interrogate me. Did not pressure me. Did not demand explanations. Yet I could feel questions waiting beneath the surface. Questions about why I looked so afraid before collapsing. Questions about what had driven me to exhaustion. Questions about the fear he had seen in my eyes that night. Eventually he spoke. Quietly. You kept looking over your shoulder before you fell. My stomach tightened immediately. Damien noticed. Of course he did. He seemed like the kind of man who noticed everything. Madeline, he said carefully, speaking my name for the first time. Whatever has you so frightened, you do not have to face it alone. I looked toward the rain-covered windows. Toward the city hidden behind gray clouds. Part of me wanted to tell him the truth. Another part wanted to run before he became involved. Because people who got too close to my problems rarely stayed safe from them. And yet, sitting in that quiet room, I found myself wondering why Damien Russo had chosen to stay at all. Fear leaves traces. Not always where people can see them. Sometimes it hides in habits. In the way you choose a seat facing the door. In the way your eyes check every window before entering a room. In the way your heart refuses to relax even when you are finally safe. The next 2 days passed quietly inside Damien's penthouse. The storm had moved on, but gray clouds still drifted above Manhattan. I spent most of my time near the windows, watching the city below. Cars moved through crowded streets. People hurried toward meetings and restaurants. Normal life continued. Mine felt suspended somewhere in between. Damien never pressured me to stay. He never asked why I seemed so nervous. Yet he never left me completely alone either. Every morning, breakfast appeared. Every afternoon, someone checked whether I needed anything. Every evening, Damien returned from work and asked the same simple question. How are you feeling? No interrogation. No demands. Just concern. It should have been comforting. Instead, it made me suspicious. People did not usually care without wanting something in return. At least, that had been my experience. On the third morning, I woke before sunrise. The city was still dark beyond the glass. Unable to sleep, I wandered into the kitchen and found Damien already there. He stood near the counter holding a cup of coffee. The soft glow of the city lights reflected across the windows behind him. He looked up as I entered. You should be sleeping. I shrugged. I could say the same thing. A faint smile appeared. Fair enough. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Then a sound from outside caught my attention. A car door closing somewhere below. Instantly, my body tensed. My eyes moved toward the window. My breathing changed. The reaction lasted only a second. Long enough. Damien noticed. Of course he noticed. He always did. He set down his coffee. Madeline. I immediately looked away. It is nothing. No. His voice remained calm. It is not. The room felt smaller suddenly. Quieter. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared toward the floor. Damien did not move closer. He did not crowd me. He simply waited. Finally, he asked the question I had been avoiding. Who are you afraid of? My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. Images flashed through my mind. Unanswered phone calls. Strange messages. The feeling of being watched. The constant fear that had followed me for months. Yet speaking those fears aloud somehow made them feel more real. I cannot tell you. The answer emerged almost as a whisper. Damien studied me carefully. Because you do not trust me? I swallowed hard. Because I do not want anyone else getting involved. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Understanding. as though he had finally uncovered part of the truth hidden beneath my silence. He nodded slowly. You think protecting people means carrying everything yourself. The words struck harder than I expected, because they were true, painfully true. For years, I had convinced myself that isolation was responsibility, that distance was protection. Damien looked toward the city before returning his gaze to mine. Whatever happened, whatever is frightening you this much, I promise you one thing. I waited. The morning light slowly began appearing above the skyline. Golden sunlight touched the buildings across Manhattan. Damien's voice remained steady, unshaken, certain. You are not facing it alone anymore. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, a small part of me wanted to believe him. The people who change your life are rarely the ones who make the loudest promises. They are the ones who quietly keep showing up until you stop expecting them to leave. Over the next week, something strange happened. Nothing happened. No mysterious messages. No sudden emergencies. No reason for my heart to race every time my phone buzzed. The silence should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me nervous. I had spent so many months waiting for the next problem that peace itself felt suspicious. Damien seemed to understand that without me saying a word. He never treated my fear like something unreasonable. He never told me to relax. He never dismissed what I felt. He simply adjusted his life around it in small ways that were impossible not to notice. If I woke up early, breakfast was already waiting in the kitchen. If I spent hours reading by the window, someone quietly brought tea without interrupting. If I wanted privacy, I received it. Every door remained open. Every choice remained mine. The freedom surprised me. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the library overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling shelves surrounded me. Sunlight spilled across polished wood floors. It felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Damien entered carrying a stack of documents. He paused when he saw me staring out the window. You look deep in thought. I smiled faintly. I am trying to decide whether you are always this patient. He considered the question. No. Then why now? For a moment, he seemed amused. Then he set the documents aside. Because some people need time before they believe they are safe. The answer settled quietly between us. I looked away first. Later that evening, I accompanied him to a charity event supporting youth education programs. It was the first time I had left the penthouse since the storm. The ballroom was elegant but welcoming. Teachers, community leaders, and donors filled the room. Conversations flowed easily. Laughter echoed beneath warm lights. For the first hour, I remained tense. Every unfamiliar face felt significant. Every unexpected movement drew my attention. Then something unexpected happened. Damien never left me alone. Not in an obvious way. Not in a possessive way. He simply stayed nearby. If someone approached to introduce themselves, he remained close enough that I never felt overwhelmed. If I needed a moment, he somehow noticed before I asked. The realization warmed something inside me that had been cold for a very long time. On the drive home, Manhattan glowed beyond the car windows. Reflections danced across rain-dark streets. For several minutes, silence filled the space between us. Finally, I spoke. Why do you keep doing this? Damien turned toward me. Doing what? Taking care of me. He looked genuinely confused, as though the answer should have been obvious. Because someone should. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Nobody had ever made it sound that simple. No speeches. No expectations. No conditions attached. Just because someone should. When we arrived back at the penthouse, I stood by the window long after Damien disappeared into his office. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. For months, fear had been the loudest voice in my life. Yet now another voice was beginning to compete with it. Quieter, gentler, more dangerous. Hope. And for the first time, I found myself wondering what would happen if I stopped preparing for people to leave and started believing one person might actually stay. The hardest truths are not the ones we hide from other people. They are the ones we hide from ourselves. A few days after the charity event, I found myself sitting on the terrace outside Damien's penthouse as the sun disappeared behind the Manhattan skyline. Autumn colors painted the horizon in shades of gold and amber. The city below looked peaceful, almost unreal. For the first time in months, I was not checking my phone every 5 minutes. I was not watching every passing car. I was not planning an escape route. The change should have made me happy. Instead, it made me emotional. Damien joined me carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to me before taking the seat beside mine. For several minutes, We watched the sunset in comfortable silence. Then he asked a question so simple it caught me completely off guard. When was the last time you felt safe? I stared at the steam rising from my cup. The answer should have come easily. It did not. My mind searched through years of memories. Apartments, jobs, relationships, cities. None of them felt right. Finally, I laughed softly. The sound carried more sadness than humor. I do not remember. Damien did not react immediately. He simply listened, the way he always did, patiently, without interrupting, without trying to fix everything. Somehow that made it easier to continue. I think it started after my mother died. The words escaped before I could stop them. Damien turned toward me. His expression softened immediately. I rarely spoke about my mother. The loss had happened years earlier, but grief does not follow calendars. Some wounds learn how to hide without ever truly disappearing. She was everything to me, I said quietly. After my father left, it was just the two of us. The city lights slowly began appearing across the skyline, one by one, like distant stars. I kept talking, maybe because I was tired of carrying the story alone, maybe because Damien had earned the truth. She worked constantly, every day, every weekend. She never complained. My fingers tightened around the cup. Then one day she got sick. The memory still hurt. Not sharply anymore, just deeply. I spent months trying to help her, trying to fix everything. But some things cannot be fixed. Damien remained silent, giving me space, giving me dignity, giving me exactly what I needed. After she was gone, I made a promise. My voice dropped lower. I promised myself I would never depend on anyone again. There it was, the real truth. Not the fear, not the exhaustion, the belief underneath all of it. The belief that needing people was dangerous because eventually they leave. The realization hung between us. Damien looked out toward the city for a long moment before speaking. Your mother taught you how to be strong. I nodded. Yes. But she probably never wanted you to be alone. The words hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, I knew he was right. My mother had sacrificed everything to give me a better life. She would have hated seeing me turn independence into isolation. Tears gathered unexpectedly in my eyes. Not from sadness. From recognition. Damien noticed, but did not mention it. He simply stayed beside me as darkness settled over Manhattan. For the first time, someone had seen the fear behind my silence, the grief behind my independence, the loneliness behind my strength. And instead of walking away, he remained exactly where he was, beside me, listening, understanding, staying. Sometimes the moment you stop pretending to be strong is the moment you finally become strong. The conversation on the terrace stayed with me for days. Not because Damien had offered solutions. He had not. Not because he had promised to fix my past. He could not. What stayed with me was something far simpler. He listened. In a world where most people waited for their turn to speak, Damien listened as though every word mattered. A week later, I found myself spending less time looking over my shoulder and more time looking ahead. The change was small, almost invisible, yet it was there. One afternoon, I returned from a walk through the city carrying a bag of books from a small bookstore near Bryant Park. The air was cool. The streets were crowded with people enjoying the last warm days of autumn. For the first time in months, I had walked through Manhattan without feeling afraid of every stranger who passed by. When I entered the penthouse, I found Damien standing near the windows speaking on the phone. His expression was serious, but the moment he noticed me, something softened in his eyes. He ended the call a minute later and approached. How was the walk? Good. I smiled. Actually good. One corner of his mouth lifted. That sounds like progress. It was. More than he realized. Later that evening, we shared dinner overlooking the city. The skyline glittered beneath. Eventually, the conversation drifted into silence. Comfortable silence. Then Damien asked a question. What are you thinking about? I looked down at my hands. For a moment, I considered giving a safe answer. Instead, I chose honesty. You. The word escaped before I could stop it. Damien looked surprised. So was I. Heat rushed to my face. Yet something inside me refused to retreat this time. You keep showing up, I continued quietly. Every day, every conversation, every difficult moment. My throat tightened slightly. I do not understand why. Damien studied me for several seconds. Then he answered with complete sincerity. Because I care about what happens to you. No dramatic speech. No complicated explanation. Just the truth. The simplicity of it broke something open inside me. Months of fear. Years of loneliness. A lifetime of believing I had to survive alone. Suddenly the weight felt unbearable. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I turned away immediately, embarrassed by the emotion. But Damien did not look uncomfortable. He did not pretend not to notice. He simply moved closer and sat beside me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then the words I had carried for years finally emerged. I am tired. My voice shook. I am tired of being afraid. Tired of carrying everything alone. Tired of pretending I am fine. The confession hung in the quiet room. Damien reached over and gently took my hand. His grip was steady, certain, safe. Then stop carrying it alone, he said softly. The same words. The same promise. Yet this time, I believed them. And sitting beside him beneath the lights of Manhattan, I finally allowed myself to do something I had not done in years. I stopped fighting the possibility that someone might stay. Trust is not built in a single moment. It is built in hundreds of small moments that quietly prove someone means what they say. After that night, something changed between Damien and me. Not dramatically, not all at once. The fear did not disappear overnight. The doubts did not magically fade. But the walls I had spent years building began to crack. One morning, I found myself laughing over breakfast. Truly laughing. The sound startled me so much that I nearly stopped. Damien noticed immediately. What? He asked. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. Nothing. He leaned back in his chair. That is the first real laugh I have heard from you. The observation should have embarrassed me. Instead, it made me thoughtful. Because he was right. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it felt like to be light. To enjoy a moment without wondering when it would end. Days passed. Autumn slowly surrendered to early winter. The city transformed around us. Holiday lights appeared in storefront windows. Decorations lined building entrances. The air grew colder. Yet for the first time in a long time, I felt warmer inside. One afternoon, Damien invited me to accompany him to a community center his foundation supported. Children filled the gymnasium. Volunteers organized activities. Families gathered for a seasonal celebration. The atmosphere felt hopeful, alive. As I watched Damien move through the room, greeting people by name and listening to their stories, I realized how little the public version of him matched the man I knew. Headlines talked about influence, power, wealth. None of them talked about this. The way he remembered details. The way he made people feel seen. The way he quietly helped without demanding recognition. At one point, a young girl approached carrying a handmade holiday card. She handed it to Damien with a shy smile before running back to her family. He studied the card carefully, as though it were priceless. Maybe to him it was. The moment stayed with me. On the drive back to Manhattan, snow began falling lightly outside the windows. Tiny white flakes drifted through the evening air. Beautiful, peaceful. Damien glanced toward me. You have been quiet. I looked out at the city lights. I was thinking. Dangerous habit. I laughed softly. I was thinking about how wrong I was. His expression shifted. About what? The answer came easier than I expected. About people. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable. Reflective. I spent years believing that depending on someone was weakness. I looked toward him. You proved otherwise. Damien remained quiet for several seconds. Then he asked a question. And what happens now? The words lingered in the air between us. What happened now? For months, my life had been defined by fear. Then by healing. Now I stood at the edge of something unfamiliar. A future. A choice. A chance to build something different. When we arrived home, I paused near the penthouse windows overlooking the glowing city. Damien joined me. The snow continued falling beyond the glass. Soft. Steady. Beautiful. For the first time since that stormy night, I did not feel trapped between past and future. I knew what I wanted. Slowly, I turned toward him. Now, I said quietly, I stopped running. And for the first time, those words felt completely true. Healing does not arrive all at once. It arrives in small moments that seem ordinary until one day you realize they have changed everything. The weeks that followed felt different from anything I had experienced before. Not because every problem disappeared. Not because life suddenly became perfect. But because fear was no longer making every decision for me. Winter settled over Manhattan. Snow-covered rooftops. Holiday lights reflected across icy sidewalks. The city seemed softer somehow. Slower. More forgiving. One morning, I woke before sunrise and stood near the penthouse windows watching snow drift through the darkness. The skyline stretched endlessly before me. For the first time in years, my thoughts were not consumed by worst-case scenarios. I was thinking about possibilities instead. The realization felt almost unbelievable. A quiet sound behind me pulled me from my thoughts. Damien entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to me, without a word, before taking his place beside the window. We stood there together watching the city wake up. Comfortable silence surrounded us. The kind that only exists when 2 people no longer feel the need to fill every moment with conversation. Eventually, Damien glanced toward me. "You seem different." I smiled into my coffee. "I think I am." He nodded as though that answer made perfect sense. Maybe it did. Later that day, I visited the elementary school where I had once volunteered before everything in my life became consumed by stress and fear. The familiar hallways welcomed me back. Children's artwork covered the walls. Teachers hurried between classrooms carrying stacks of papers. The entire building felt alive. Watching students laugh and learn reminded me of a version of myself I had almost forgotten. A version that cared about more than survival. When I returned to the penthouse that evening, I found Damien working in his office. The door stood open as always. I leaned against the frame and watched him for a moment. Focused, calm, reliable. He noticed me immediately. Somehow he always did. "Good day," he asked. "A very good day." Something in my voice made him smile. I stepped farther into the room. I realized something today. Damien leaned back in his chair. "What is that?" I took a deep breath. The answer mattered. "For months, I thought you saved me that night because you found me in the storm." His expression remained attentive, patient, waiting. "But that is not what saved me." A flicker of curiosity crossed his face. I continued. "You stayed afterward." The room grew quiet. Neither of us looked away. Because that was the truth. Anyone could have helped me for one night. Anyone could have offered temporary safety. Damien had given me something far more valuable. Consistency, trust, time, the chance to believe in people again. Slowly, he stood and walked toward me. Not rushing, not forcing the moment, simply closing the distance. "You did the hard part yourself, Madeline." I shook my head gently. "Not alone." The words lingered between us. Honest, undeniable. Outside, snow continued falling across the city. Inside, warmth filled the room. For so long, I had believed healing meant becoming independent enough to need nobody. Now I understood something far different. Healing meant learning that strength and connection could exist together. And standing there beside Damien, I finally allowed myself to believe that the future waiting ahead might be brighter than the past I had spent so long trying to escape. The most important moments in life are rarely the ones we plan. They are the ones that quietly prove how far we have come. Spring arrived in Manhattan almost without warning. Snow disappeared. Trees along the streets began to bloom. Cafes opened their outdoor seating. The city felt awake again, alive again. Months had passed since the storm that changed everything. Looking back, it was difficult to recognize the woman I had been that night. The woman who believed fear was permanent. The woman who thought carrying every burden alone was the price of survival. She felt like a distant memory now. One Saturday morning, I stood outside a newly renovated community learning center overlooking the Hudson River. Children ran across the lawn. Families gathered near colorful tents. Volunteers prepared for the opening celebration. The project had become my passion during the past several months. A place dedicated to education, mentorship, and opportunity. A place built on hope instead of fear. Watching people arrive filled me with quiet pride. Not because I had done it alone. Because I had finally learned I did not have to. A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. "You are smiling again." I turned and found Damien walking toward me. The morning sunlight reflected across the river behind him. For a second, I remembered another day. Another version of myself. Rain, fear, darkness. Then I looked at the man standing before me now and felt only gratitude. "I smile more these days," I admitted. I noticed. His expression softened, the same way it always did when he looked at me. The celebration continued throughout the afternoon. Children explored classrooms. Families toured the building. Volunteers shared stories. Laughter echoed through hallways that had once been empty. Several times I caught myself simply standing still and taking it all in. For years, I had been so focused on surviving that I forgot how to appreciate moments like these. Damien found me near sunset, standing beside the river. The sky glowed gold and orange above the water. Boats drifted quietly in the distance. Manhattan shimmered behind us. Beautiful, endless, peaceful. Thinking again? He asked. I laughed softly. Always. We stood side by side watching the horizon. Eventually, I turned toward him. Do you know what I remember most about that night? Damien raised an eyebrow. The storm. I shook my head. No. My voice grew quieter. I remember waking up and realizing someone stayed. The memory still carried weight. Not because of the fear, because of what came afterward. Every conversation, every act of patience, every moment he proved that trust was not a mistake. Damien looked out toward the river before speaking. You gave me a reason to stay. The simple honesty of the answer stole my breath. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Words were unnecessary. The journey from that storm to this sunset had already said everything. Slowly, I reached for his hand. This time there was no fear, no hesitation, no instinct to run, only certainty. Damien's fingers intertwined with mine. Warm, steady, familiar. The same hands that had caught me when I was falling. The difference was that now I was choosing to stay. Together we watched the final sunlight disappear beyond the horizon. A new chapter waiting where the old one ended. And as the city lights began appearing across the skyline, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the person who saves your life is not the one who rescues you in a single moment. Sometimes it is the one who remains beside you long enough to teach you how to live again.